If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come on. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, I think we're definitely getting a subject matter expert in on this one.
I thought we were against subject matter experts.
I know. I wondered how you would respond to that to that reference after our SME critiques over.
No. Just to be clear, it's good to have knowledgeable people, but it's important to make sure that the people are thinking for themselves. Telling them, teaching people how to think, not what to think. As a subject matter expert.
So on that note, we're joined by André Schutten, who's the Director of Law and Public Policy and General Legal Counsel for ARPA Canada. Thank you, André, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show.
No, thank you. Well, thank you for making time for us. Actually, I've been listening to you for a very long time. And I was like, man, that guy's so smart. I was like, yeah. He's really every time I listen to you speak, I've always learned something. So thank you for doing this. So this is exciting for me.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. I mean, they're very flattering. So thanks. I definitely have learned much from many other people, including yourself, Darnell, because I've also heard you speak, I think, for the first time last summer, and learned a lot from your speech that I was in attendance for, and it was great to learn from you, to meet you for the first time then, and to keep on learning, and now to be on your show is really cool. So thanks for having me.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely grateful. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of your background? How did you end up at ARPA? How did
Sure.
your legal career sort of get to that place?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Law and Public Policy for ARPA. ARPA is an acronym, ARPA. It stands for the Association for Reformed Political Action. So Reformed being the Reformed theological tradition. And so we're a Christian organization that engages, equips, educates, encourages Christians in this country, in Canada, to be politically engaged, to be politically active. And then we also, the second part of our mission is to bring a biblical perspective to our civil governments, whether that's in the executive branch of government, the legislative branch, or in the judiciary. So I've made presentations to various House of Commons committees, Senate committees. I've been in the courts, Superior Court, the Courts of Appeal, and the Supreme Court of Canada on various important constitutional cases, and we lobby politicians and so on to try to advance good public policy, good laws in this country that benefit not just Christians, of course, but that benefit all Canadians. And we're informed, of course, by our theological tradition and by Scripture itself. We believe that the gospel is something that is liberating. It's something that has something good to say. It gives us good direction for all aspects of life. That would include, of course, the political sphere.
I myself, as well as Darnell, I think, have both been exposed to your constitutional talk. Or maybe that's not the right way to reference it, at Ezra Institute.
Right.
Darnell, as you mentioned, when Darnell was speaking, I think is when he heard it. I spent earlier in November at the Pastor's Colloquium at Ezra and was really blessed. I wonder if you can speak to what gave the impetus for you to even cultivate that talk, and then maybe speak to where do you usually give it, and how it's a useful tool for you.
Right. So I've definitely come to understand, particularly in the last 2 years, that there's a massive lack of understanding of how we got the constitutional arrangement that we have today. Like, why does our civil government work the way it does? Why are certain systems in place? Why is the judiciary independent from Parliament? Why does Parliament have its two houses, the House of Commons and the Senate? How is it supposed to keep the government in check, or does it? Or does the government actually dictate how, is it the Prime Minister that should dictate the types of laws we have in this country, or should it be Parliament as a whole that does that, and so on? And how did that all develop? And in the last 2 years, I've seen such unprecedented restrictions on freedom and liberty that I wondered, is there some sort of amnesia going on around our constitutional history. And so I'm a lawyer. I went through law school over a decade ago. And actually, our constitutional history is not taught in law school. In fact, it's not taught in any of the law schools in Canada, with the exception of one. And there, it's only an optional course if you want to take it. So if I take in my law school, my constitutional history goes back to 1867 when Canada became a country. And so there's one course that I have to take that studies that aspect of our constitution. But there's no study that goes back beyond that. No talk about Magna Carta from 1215 AD, like over 800 years ago. No talk about the Glorious Revolution of 1688. No talk about the enduring struggle over 600 years between the church, between the gentry or the barons and the king. No talk about the struggle for human rights, for fundamental freedoms to be enshrined in a law above the king. All of that was missing from my legal career or my legal education. And so I started digging into that myself over the last 2 years, done quite extensive reading on both from a historical perspective and also a legal historical perspective. And I've developed a presentation that I thought might be a little boring sounding with its title, but it's called our constitutional heritage in the West. And what I try to do is to explain to a lay audience, so people who are non-lawyers, in a way that's engaging, how we got to where we are today, so that we can understand and appreciate just what went into the long 800 plus year struggle for a constitutional democracy that we have today. And also what's at stake if we're not aware of what all went into it, and what can so easily be lost. And I think what we are losing over the last 2 years. And so I give that presentation. I have given it to multiple churches across the country and to other groups, and it's been well received. And I think some of the issues that you've been talking about on the podcast, touch on this as well. Too many of us, including lawyers and judges and politicians, but also just regular average citizens in this country, just don't know that history. And if we don't know our history, we're bound to repeat it in terrible ways. And so my hope is that if more citizens can be awakened to the blood, the sweat, the tears, the pain and the suffering and the loss that has been sacrificed for the system of law and the system of government that we have today, then perhaps if we understand that, we would be more eager to defend it against certain erosions and attacks.
Yeah. Would you? I'm curious. So when I was in school, I again doing accounting, but I was really into economics, and I took a course called History of Economic Thought. But the prof was talking about how, very much like the teachers or the professors that were currently teaching this course, when they're gone, no one's going to continue teaching this. And I was just wondering, is there a parallel there where, let's call it, history of legal thought used to be something that was taught and it's, disappeared? I'm wondering if you've sort of covered that or learned about that as well in your digging.
Yeah. So there's one Canadian legal historian. His name is Ryan Alford, and he wrote a book is published last year called 7 Absolute Rights. And it's an excellent book. He's an excellent historian. And he makes that point that, in fact, up until the 1950s, in order to receive your law license, in order to complete your legal education, you didn't just have to do one mandatory course on your constitutional history. You had to do 3 mandatory courses. That was the absolute minimum, and that was at a time before the charter was in place. I mean, now the mandatory constitutional course that you have to take in law school basically is dominated by the charter. So back then, you're reading, you're reading Blackstone's Institutes. You were reading about Edward Coke and the struggle between the judiciary and the king. You were reading about Magna Carta. You're reading about history and everything that went into the constitutional arrangement of 1867 when Canada became a country. All of that was mandatory lessons back then, until the 1950s, when there was a sudden and very deliberate shift away from the idea of constitutional law as being a law distinct from the whim or the will of the governing people, of the government, towards what's called legal positivism, which is basically saying that the rule of law is basically being governed by due process, and as long as the laws are passed in a proper way, then whatever the law says, and there's no there's no deeper grappling with these more foundational constitutional principles like freedom of religion or freedom of speech or inherent human rights apart from the will of the people as reflected in the laws of the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Now, to transition to the topic of the day, or what everybody's talking about right now, is Bill C-4, the legislation to ban conversion therapy. Can you give us some commentary on it and what's it about and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people talk generally about banning conversion therapy, most Canadians would be in agreement and say, yeah, conversion therapy, the little that they might know about it sounds like a despicable practice, and we should be all on the same page about banning it. Or sometimes people are even surprised that it isn't banned already. Well, it all comes down to how do you define the practice of conversion therapy? So if by conversion therapy we're talking about a coercive, torturous procedure by which somebody by which a person tries to convert somebody from a homosexual identity to a heterosexual identity, through things like electrical shock therapy or weird shaming rituals or that kind of stuff. Then, if that's what we mean by conversion therapy, then okay, fine, no problem. We can ban something like that. The problem is that Bill C-4, which just passed into law, and its predecessor, Bill C-6, which was in the previous parliament but didn't pass before the election was called, those bills have defined conversion therapy so broadly, and I think intentionally so. They've defined it so broadly as to capture other forms of therapy or other forms of practices like spiritual counseling, for example, or pastoral counseling or talk therapy. And by doing that, what they have done is said, we're going to pass a law that bans conversion therapy. And now the definition of conversion therapy includes pastoral counseling, spiritual counseling, talk therapy. And so for anybody who chooses for themselves to seek out spiritual counseling around questions of sexual identity, sexual ethics, and so on, that if they seek that counseling out from somebody who comes out of a biblical worldview, from a Christian pastor, let's say, who holds the Word of God as the ultimate source of truth, then they're going to run afoul of this law. The law won't target the person seeking the counseling, but the law will target the person offering the counseling or giving the counseling. And that's a really big problem. It's a big problem for pastors and Christian counselors, and it's a big problem for particularly for members of the LGBTQ community, because such a law is very discriminatory against them.
How so, actually?
Yeah. So, I mean, the impact on pastors and counselors is more or less obvious, right? It will now be effective January 8th of 2022. It will now be a crime to offer, promote, advertise, or provide any service, practice, or treatment that seeks to change a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, right? So that obviously targets pastors and counselors and so on. But there's actually something in it that is very, I think, discriminatory to members of the LGBTQ community or other people who may not identify as being a member of that community, but do have same-sex attraction or do struggle with their gender identity. And that is that the criminal code does not regulate anybody's choices as it relates to the type of counseling they want to pursue for themselves. If you're a heterosexual. If you're a heterosexual and you want to seek counseling that accords with your biblical worldview or your religious worldview, you have at her. You go ahead. No questions asked by the federal government. No impediments from the criminal code. But if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, well, the federal government does have something to say, and the criminal code does put an impediment in your way. They say, well, you're only allowed to access these kinds of counseling or this kind of counseling over here, but not this kind of counseling over there, even if you want to consent to it. So, counseling that accords to your religious worldview, if you're a Christian, but a member of the LGBTQ community, or if you're a Christian and you have same-sex attraction, or if you're a Christian and you're struggling with your gender identity, well, there's certain types of support and help and counseling that is out of bounds for you. because of your same-sex attraction or because of your membership in the LGBTQ community. And that on its face is discriminatory. Who does, with all due respect to the Attorney General of Canada, Mr. David Lametti, who's the one who introduced this bill, who is he to tell a man or a woman who struggles with same-sex attraction what kind of therapy or what kind of counseling they should or should not have access to? It's a form of condescension, a form of patronizing on the part of the government towards people, adults in this country who that I think is actually pretty despicable.
So I think what you've done is definitely demonstrate a little bit of the fact that this bill has some illogical conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've heard you speak on a few more of those, and I was wondering if you could give a couple other examples where when you apply this law, you can see there's some absurdities of how certain things come to play. One of the examples I think I recall you talking about was wearing makeup with regards to children.
Right. Yeah. So there's two things that are really worth pointing out in this bill. So the first is its internal inconsistencies. Yeah, like you said. So for example, in the preamble, it talks about how this bill is necessary because it's condemning and ending harmful practices that are based on harmful stereotypes about gender and about sex. But then it goes on to define conversion therapy in a way that says that any practice, any service or any practice that attempts to get somebody, a child or an adult, to reduce their gender expression that does not align to their sex assigned at birth is a form of conversion therapy. Well, for any lawmaker or any person who's charged with enforcing the law, a police officer or a judge applying the law or anyone else, in order for them to make any sense of that aspect of conversion therapy, you actually need to apply a very rigid gender stereotype. So let me spell it out with an example because it's pretty confusing to try to explain it without having the words in front of us. So I'll give you the example. So the example is this: I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. If I have a rule in my house, a practice in my house that says that nobody in my house is allowed to wear makeup until they're 18 years old, I just say, that's my rule. And I don't like, maybe as a parent, I don't like makeup because it sexualizes children, let's say, or has a tendency to do that. Okay, so that's my rule. Then I'm allowed to enforce that rule, that practice against my daughter, because if she wears or doesn't wear makeup, it has nothing to do with her gender identity or her gender expression, insofar as it being different than her gender identity aligning with her so-called sex assigned at birth. But if I enforce that rule vis-a-vis my son, let's say my son at age 14 or 16 wants to start wearing eyeliner or lipstick or blush or whatever, nail polish. And I say, no, you can't do that. The practice in this house, the rule in this house is no makeup until you're 18. Well, now suddenly it's a practice that seeks to reduce the gender expression of an individual where that expression does not align with his sex assigned at birth. But in order for that to make sense, there has to be a stereotype, a rigid stereotype about what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man as it relates to the use of makeup. So in order to make any sense of this new rule, this new criminal law, you actually have to have a rigid understanding of what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl, and actually the behavior of a boy and a behavior of a girl. And so it's like inherently self-contradictory. It's a really, really problematic bill. And that's what you get when, and this is going to be my second point about the bill, this is what you get when you have a deeply, deeply religious piece of legislation that's unmoored from reality. And this is what I would want your listeners to really understand, that Bill C-4 is one of the most explicitly religious pieces of legislation we've seen in a very, very long time. I mean,
Wow.
yeah. So, and you'll see it most clearly when you read the preamble to the bill. It uses language like myth multiple times, and it doesn't describe mythical facts, right? Myth is usually applied to facts, factual claims, right? Like if you say a unicorn is a real animal, you say, no, it's a mythical creature. It's a myth that unicorns exist, right? It's either fact or myth. But what they do in the preamble of this bill is they apply it to value judgments, to value claims. Well, you can't say that one value claim is mythical and another one is not. It's either a true or a good or a just value claim, or it's not. But those are things that we debate in philosophical and religious terms. And so what this bill says is that it's a myth that one sexual orientation or one gender identity or gender expression should be preferred over another. And that's what they want to condemn. That's what they want to denounce through this bill. Well, what does that say then about not just the Christian worldview as it relates to sexual ethics and the Christian worldview as it relates to gender and sex, to personal identity? It actually is a claim against other religious views on this as well. The Jewish religion has very distinct views on this. The Islamic worldview, the Buddhist worldview, the Hindu worldview, First Nations Aboriginal spirituality has claims around these things. And so what Bill C-4 is saying is there is a religion. It has a name, and that it's got multiple names, but the religion behind Bill C-4 is secular humanism is one name. I actually prefer Gnostic liberalism. I think it's a Gnostic bill, deeply Gnostic, and it's imposing the civil government through Parliament is imposing its religious worldview as it relates to identity, as it relates to sexual ethics, and as it relates to sex itself, and saying our religious claims are now truth for everyone. And if you have a different religious claim as it relates to sex, identity, and so on, then we criminalize the imposition or the promotion or the advertising of that view. This is about as religious as it gets when we're talking about a criminal law ban. Yeah.
Darnell and I have, we had an episode on church and state, and I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit about maybe the idea of separation of church and state. And we would definitely say it's, perverted, where they say, oh, that means the church can't speak to the state, where in reality it should have been the state's not speaking to the church. Right. But I'm wondering if you can also, how do we define our constitution such that things like this would not be permitted because it's clearly, as you put it, a religious law or a religious.
Yeah, I no, exactly. Yeah, a couple of thoughts, and that's a great question. I think first of all, every law is a moral document, right? The tax code, I believe, is a moral document because it's saying certain things are going to be taxed at higher rates than other things. For example, taxing alcohol and cigarettes at a higher rate than others is a form of there's a morality behind that, or taxing higher income earners at a higher rate than lower income earners there's a moral or there's a moral calculation going on there to make that kind of a decision. So in every aspect, law and legislation, there's morality underneath it. But to the point of separation of church and state, I would say anyway, is that those are two different institutions with two different sets of obligations and responsibilities, and the church shouldn't try to do the civil government's job, and the civil government shouldn't try to do the church's job. Those are distinct institutions with distinct responsibilities. Now, that's very different from saying that somebody who is a member of a church can't bring their faith to bear on a public debate about what is good, right, true, beautiful, as far as public policy goes. Of course, public policy needs to be informed by a religious worldview. You can't have a truly neutral worldview. And so what I would say is, as it relates to this particular law and a constitutional challenge to it, and I think this Bill C-4 is constitutionally suspect at best. I think there's a decent chance that the courts may either strike it down or read it down. It's more likely that they'll read it down. What that means is they won't strike the rule from the criminal code, but what they'll do is they'll say, look, when you're applying this law, you have to apply it very narrowly to coercive and torturous practices that are done in a sort of therapeutic medical kind of situation, something along those lines. So I think that's where the judges may bring it that way. But yeah, to that, I think that's where our Constitution should be kicking in. The Constitution should be taught. What our judges are actually tasked to do as interpreters and appliers of the Constitution is they should be saying, look, the Charter speaks about freedom of religion, and the Charter speaks about freedom of expression, and the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and these rights protected in Section 2 and Section 7 of the Charter, they should allow for the free exchange of ideas around these value judgments, free exchange of ideas around what are good sexual ethics and what are bad sexual ethics, good ideas, and the exchange of ideas around religious claims about what it means to be human, what it means to be male, and what it means to be female, and so that's what the Charter exists to do, is to protect that kind of debate and deliberation. So as long as quote unquote so-called conversion therapy, so broadly understood, as long as that's being done in a non-coercive way, then we shouldn't be criminalizing it. I think that and my hope would be that a court would recognize that and say, look, this bill goes way, way, way too far.
Mm-hmm. So in regards to like our Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
we had David Koizies, Professor David Koizies on. He wrote the book Political Illusions.
Political Visions and Illusions. It's a really good
political
book.
visions. Political visions and illusions. And he made a point about how there are some deficiencies in our Constitution, in the sense it's not like the American Constitution. So because of some of the deficiencies that our Constitution has, it kind of creates a window for problems to happen like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would you say the difference is between the two?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I had studied more of American constitutionalism, but I think that the big difference that I'm aware of is that what Canada has in our charter is Section 1, which they don't have an equivalent of in the American Bill of Rights. And what our Section 1 does is it says that all of the freedoms and all of the rights that follow in the charter, so your fundamental freedoms of religion and conscience and expression and association and so on, and your legal rights, they're all subject to what's called a reasonable limits clause in Section 1. Section 1 talks about how all of the rights and freedoms guaranteed in the charter are subject to such reasonable limits as are prescribed by law, as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So it's called the limitation. Well, it's actually in the charter, it's called the guarantee clause, because it's supposed to be about guaranteeing our rights and freedoms, but it's become our limitation clause, limitations on rights. And so what happens is that our judges, if you make a claim in court that says the government has violated my freedom of religion, or the government has violated my freedom of expression, then that's not the end of the analysis. You have to prove in court that they have violated your freedom, but then the government gets to prove, they have an opportunity to prove, it's like, yeah, but it was reasonable. It was reasonable and necessary in a free and democratic society to limit that person's right because of X, Y, Z. And then the judge actually does the balancing exercise. And so I think that it's understandable that we wouldn't say freedom of religion should be an absolute right, in the sense that anyone who says, I need to do this or that practice because it's my religion, and so the government can't do anything about it. Think about, for example, female genital mutilation, which has been defended as a religious practice. Or there used to be a Hindu practice of burning a widow alive on the funeral pyre of her dead husband. No one in Canada would say that that should be a religious practice protected by freedom of religion. Of course not. There has to be a reasonable limit in a free and democratic society that says, well, no, we don't do that. We don't do that religious practice here. It's not okay, and we will prohibit it by law, as we should. But what has happened instead is that actually there's a whole lot more of our religious practices and beliefs that have been limited more and more and more by the massive growth of what's called the administrative state, that is the bureaucracy. and that as the bureaucracy grows, the more it interferes with religious practices, whether that's in education or in worship or in social services, including things like counseling, what we're talking about now. And as the state grows, judges have become, I think the trend has been that they've become more and more deferential to the state bureaucracy. And there's this level of trust that the judiciary, the judges have, not of the citizens, but of the bureaucracy, to say, well, the bureaucracy, they have these experts in medicine, and they have these experts in law, and they have experts in counseling, or experts in all kinds of other things. And so those experts say that we need to restrict this or that religious practice. And so they keep deferring to the reasonableness claims of the bureaucracy. And that's a big impediment. It seems to me that the trend has been, especially as it relates to the fundamental freedoms, the trend has been that our courts are much too deferential to the administrative state, to the bureaucracy.
No, that's good. I want to circle back a little bit. You had mentioned a little bit about, the judges striking down some of the, let's call it, the bad parts of this bill, or confining the application to a coercive context. Can you speak to, how did we end up in this place where we would deem the bill to be so bad? How did it get passed without some of this constitutional rigor being applied to say, is it constitutional?
Agree or disagree with our views? Give us your 2 cents. You can leave your comments on any of our social media platforms or email us at sixcentsreport@gmail.com.
6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change.
So I'm glad you raised that, because how Bill C-4 got passed in Parliament is actually a historical anomaly. It's absolutely unprecedented to my knowledge. We've never seen in the history of Canada an amendment to the criminal code that passed through both houses of Parliament, so both the House of Commons and the Senate, without any deliberation, without any debate, without any true vote on its content, without any study by any of the committees. This is unprecedented. So what we have is a bill that's changing the criminal code in a very big way, and not one parliamentarian ever got to speak to the bill or raise any concerns about the bill or study the bill, and that should be shocking to this nation, no matter what side of the issue you are on. I mean, it's been a total collapse of the opposition in our parliamentary democracy. So let me just backtrack for you for a little bit. So before Bill C-4 was Bill C-6 in the previous Parliament, which was on similar content. It was an act to amend the criminal code to ban conversion therapy. But in Bill C-6, the definition was actually even more vague. So a very vague definition can be problematic, but sometimes a vague definition could give us a little bit of cover because of its vagueness. So you can hope that a judge would be able to work with a vague definition and try to allow pastors and counselors and so on to be able to do non-coercive counseling. But what Bill C-6 said is, you're allowed to consent as an adult. You're allowed to consent to so-called conversion therapy. If you consent, then it's not criminal. And at the time, so we're talking just 6 months ago, the Attorney General of Canada himself, David Lametti, said at the Justice Committee that he had to allow for consenting adults to do conversion therapy because the charter required it. And he said that the Department of Justice, who answers to him, had wrestled with this question, and they had come back and advised him that we cannot ban it for consenting adults because the charter wouldn't allow for that. And yet now with Bill C-4, 6 months later, we get this bill tabled and it bans it also for consenting adults. And so it's a whole new bill. It's totally different in that sense. And so for the opposition, the Conservatives in the House of Commons as well as in the Senate, for them to not put up a fight at all and to point out that, say, like, look, the Justice Minister himself, the Liberal Justice Minister, said just half a year ago, he is on record as saying that neither he nor the entire Justice Department believes that you can ban conversion therapy for consenting adults. Why in the world now does this bill ban it for consenting adults? That's a basic talking point, an easy reason to vote against Bill C-4. And yet what happened? Well, what happened is that on November 29th, it's a Monday, late in the afternoon, Justice Minister David Lametti introduces Bill C-4. It's tabled. And the bill is as bad as I've already outlined. 2 days later, on Wednesday, December the 1st, it's the opposition, so this conservatives, right? So it's a Liberal Justice Minister who tables the bill. It's a Liberal bill. It's the conservatives on December the 1st in the afternoon. They put forward what's called a unanimous motion, which calls on the entire House of Commons to pass Bill C-4 by skipping every single stage of deliberation. Skip second reading, skip sending it to committee, skip the study, skip the witnesses, skip the experts, skip any sort of amendments, skip third reading and debate and deliberation at that stage, and pass it straight into the Senate. And the way a unanimous motion works is that the motion is read off, and then you don't vote for the motion. There's simply a pause. The speaker pauses. He waits for anyone to say nay, and all you need is a single nay, one no in the House of 338 MPs, and then it's like, okay, no, if even just one person says no, we should actually study this bill, then fine, then it goes back and goes through the entire parliamentary process. But no one spoke up.
Nobody said no.
No one said no. No one said no. Even though, again, just 6 months ago, the Justice Minister himself should have said no to such a bill, because he had said, well, this is unconstitutional. So the time to fix something like that would be at what's called committee study, right? And that's where the House of Commons, all 338 of these MPs, they don't all deliberate over the finer content of a bill. Like, it's sent to a special committee that specializes in that subject matter. And so this bill should have gone to what's called the Justice Committee. And the Justice Committee has, I think it's 15, MPs that sit on it that are more or less experts in the issues of justice in the criminal code and so on. And they bring in witnesses and experts and so on. I've presented to that committee before. And they say, oh, look, this section is really good. This section is problematic for these reasons, and you should adjust it this way, or just add this word or delete this phrase or whatever. That happens there. The bill is refined, and then it comes back to the House of Commons for a final debate and vote. That's what's supposed to happen, but it didn't happen. So that's December 1st, right? Skips that entire process. So then we're like, okay, that's crazy. I can't believe that happened. That took everybody by surprise. So we're like, okay, well, let's focus on the Senate. Maybe the Senate will do its job. It's been called the chamber of sober second thought, right? So let's see what they're going to do. Well, it goes to the Senate, and lo and behold, in the Senate, same thing. The leader of the opposition, the leader of the conservatives, that senator stands up and puts forward a unanimous motion saying, oh, let's just pass this bill. We have better things to do. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. We have better things to do. Let's just pass this bill without deliberation, study, or debate. And again, same thing happened. So that happened on last week, Tuesday, I believe it was. So about 6 days after it had passed through the House of Commons. Again, skips second reading and debate. It skips study at the committee. It skips witnesses and experts and stakeholders. It skips third reading debate, and it's passed straight into law. The next day, it was December 8th. It was signed into law by the Governor General. It comes into effect January 8th of 2022. So I actually wrote an article about this very problem, and this goes back to our constitutional heritage in a way, because we used to have it 800 years ago that the king, as the head of the government, what his word was law, and there was no opposition. Opposition was not allowed. And so over the course of about 400 or 500 years, there is all kinds of conflict and struggle and war and bloodshed and torture and imprisonment and so on. And over the course of 500, 600 years or so, we developed a parliamentary system in England. And that really comes to a pinnacle in the year 1688, with what's called the Glorious Revolution, where Parliament asserted its supremacy over the king and the government. And part of that supremacy is that within Parliament, there must always be debate and deliberation. And some people within Parliament would be very supportive of the king. Some people would have concerns about the king and his actions and so on. But the point was that Parliament would keep the king and his government in check. That's where we got the phrase responsible government from. That is not that, well, they're so responsible because they spend their money so wisely and they never go into debt. That's not what we mean by responsible government. What we mean is that the government, which is the prime minister and his cabinet and that massive bureaucracy, they are responsible to Parliament. But in order for Parliament to work the way it's supposed to work, it's set up as what's called an adversarial system, which is that they're supposed to deliberate and debate and ask questions. And that's particularly the role of the opposition. And so John Diefenbaker, who was our prime minister in the 1950s, he was a conservative prime minister. He's a pretty remarkable man, actually, and some of his legacy with Canada is actually is a good legacy. He's the one who gave the vote to our First Nations peoples. He's the one who brought in the Canada Human Rights, the Bill of Rights, sorry. And he had made many other advances in human rights in this country. And he spoke about the very, very important role of the opposition. He said the role of the opposition is as important in Parliament as that of the government, because its role is to keep the government side in check. It's to ask questions. It's to force the government to explain itself. And that totally collapsed on this bill. And it should shock the conscience of this nation that no opposition stood up and simply asked questions. No opposition member said, no, we're not going to fast track this one because this is a clearly unconstitutional bill, or this bill is going to have implications for pastors and counselors across this country, or this bill has an unusual impact on the LGBTQ community and could be seen as discriminatory against them, or this bill is simply poorly drafted. Whatever, I don't care what they have to say about the bill so much as the fact that it should be debated, and that was completely missing last week. So it does not speak well. It does not speak well for the health of our democracy in this country. That's for sure. I published. So I went back to the writings and the speeches of John Diefenbaker, and I did an interview with him post-mortem, like after he has died, and just took direct quotes from speeches he's given or things he's said, and I fit it into a back and forth dialogue between myself and him, and just to show just how much the opposition, which is a conservative opposition in this parliament, how much they failed in their task a week and 2 weeks ago.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was listening to the episode on Liberty Dispatch, Michael Thiessen, he was pretty not happy about that, and he was saying where are the Christian political representatives?
Mm-hmm.
He was really disappointed that there was no believers that were able to stand up and say something.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine that it would have been a very, very tense moment. It happened very quickly and so on. I have a couple of friends that are members of parliament, and I asked them straight up, like, what in the world happened? Like that's crazy. And it was clear that there was a phenomenal amount of pressure in the moment.
Of course.
So I have some empathy for that. And yet at the same time, it's like, this is unacceptable, and this is a thing that's missed. Like you can watch footage on YouTube or whatever of this motion going down, and you actually see members of the opposition like literally dancing up and down with joy that this passed unanimously, and clapping and hugging and cheering with the Liberals and so on. And be that as it may,
breaking all their rules at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, social distancing didn't matter anymore. But the thing that is absolutely terrible about it, the thing that's so sad about it, is that they don't understand what they've just done, and that is that they've said it's now a criminal offense to offer help to people who are struggling with their gender identity, or at least to offer a certain type of help. So again, the dates are important because that motion passed unanimously on December 1st. The very next day, December 2nd, in the National Post, which is a leading national newspaper in this country, they ran a story with a headline, "Canada Too Quick to Treat Gender Dysphoria in Minors with Hormones and Surgery, Say Critics." And the article starts out with this gut-wrenching story about a woman, a mother, whose name is Mary. They've changed her name to protect her identity. Mm-hmm. And Mary has a daughter who is troubled around her changing sexual identity. And this daughter announced at age 16 that she was actually a transgender boy. And within just 2 15-minute appointments, the doctor wrote a prescription for this daughter to have testosterone injections. Okay, so like what a lot of people don't understand is it's not like you take a pill once in a while of the opposite sex hormone. Like testosterone, synthetic testosterone is injected by a needle directly into the bloodstream week after week after week. It's a perpetual treatment that one would have to take if they're changing their gender identity, if that's even a possibility. And so just 2 15-minute appointments, and this 16-year-old girl is now prescribed opposite sex hormone injections. And then the story says, the reporter reports, that within months, not years, months, this teenager has a double mastectomy and identifies.
Sorry, what's that?
A double mastectomy means both of her breasts were surgically removed. Right, 16 years old, both of her breasts are removed. Now, everybody that, if you watch the press conference around Bill C-4, they say, no, we need Bill C-4 because it's going to save lives. But that's certainly not what happened with Mary's daughter. Mary says that her child's longstanding depression and anxiety only worsened. And then at age 21, this daughter is detransitioning, now reverting back to her female identity. But what's wrong is that this young woman is missing her healthy body parts. Two of her healthy body parts were surgically removed, not because they didn't work or not because they were cancerous or because there was something wrong with them or that they were having a negative impact on her health. They were healthy, functioning body parts, and they were removed from her body because her doctor had given her 2 15-minute appointments where this girl had expressed an opposite sex gender identity. And what this daughter says to her mom is absolutely stunning. She says that while she was being wheeled into the operating room to have her breast removed, she was having doubts about her decision. And but what Bill C-4 says, and what all those dancing conservatives and liberals and everybody else in the House of Commons say, is that it was too bad, young lady, too bad for you. Because if you have doubts, that's your problem. This is the only option available for you, is that if you think you might be the opposite sex, if you might actually be transgender, well, then we've got hormones for you and we've got surgery for you. We're going to inject you with chemicals and we're going to cut off healthy body parts. And if you have doubts, well, you got to figure that out on your own. And what the Christian worldview says, hold on a second. This poor girl, she needs our compassion and she needs our help and she needs a listening ear, and we need her to talk and just share what her struggles are and what her doubts are and so on. And so that and she needs to know that she has a beautiful body that is a gift, and that there's ways that we can talk about it and embrace it and come to love it, to love that body that she's been given. And that's the way God has actually designed her. It's a beautiful gift. And I'm not saying that's going to be easy, not by any stretch, but surely we can do better than say, here's surgery or here's chemical injections, and that's all we've got for you. Bill C-4 says, we will use the power and the blunt force of the criminal law to prohibit you from having access to anyone who might give you a different view when you have those doubts. That's a stunning thing that should absolutely shock, again, the consciences of people across this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a bit troubling, and I think you mentioned about the conservatives not really standing up to prevent this or even to debate it.
Mm-hmm.
Can there's sort of two thoughts that come to my mind is like, okay, how do we as Christians respond politically, but then also how do we as Christians respond just as the church? And the political question is a little bit more also about the environment. I mean, I've been very critical that we no longer vote for representatives, we vote for teams, and which team is going to be in power. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to sort of there's those two somewhat they're different, but I'm sure there's a lot of overlap as to how we as the church would respond.
Right. Yeah, I think so. On the political side, I know there's a whole lot of Christians. I know a lot of them who just think that politics is this dirty sport, and we really shouldn't get our hands dirty in politics. That's not for us to do as as Christians. There's actually there's a proverb about that. I forget what the exact proverb is from the book of Proverbs, but it's something along the lines of where there are no oxen, the manger is clean. And I think the wisdom of that proverb applies to politics as well. It's like, look, church, we're not saying that you need to do dirty tricks in order to advance good politics in this country, but you do have to get your hands dirty. You got to roll up your sleeves, and you got to put your hand to the plow, and get some work done. And that means that we need to be engaged in politics. That means that we need to be church leaders and lay people who are not church leaders but attend church and confess Christ as King. That they need to be communicating with their civil representatives to say, this is wrong. Like, what you've done is wrong. This is going to have profound impacts on vulnerable Canadians across this country. You need to repent from this, or you need to make this right. You need to fix this, and we expect you to, and we're going to vote accordingly. I think that the church has an obligation to do that. That's how one of the ways that the church is blessed in this country compared to many other countries in this world to be part of our civil government. That's how we can influence it. But I think more than that is that we now have to prepare for this new legal reality. And I think there's a couple of things. One, I'm a lawyer, so I tend to think right away of court action, and there's already plans in place to try to set up a court challenge and a constitutional challenge to this particular bill. But I certainly have been burned enough by the courts to know that you can't put all your trust and hope in the courts. Like they will sometimes let you down as well. Just like Parliament can let you down, so can the courts.
Right.
Psalm 146 is, "Don't put your trust in princes," and I would add, in the charter or judges either. But it is an avenue that we should be exploring. We don't give up, but we have to try that. And then the other thing that we need to be doing, of course, as the church, is continuing to be mission true. We have to be willing to continue to carry out the ministry that God has tasked us with. And it just means it's going to be a little bit more risky to do that. So I think that what we need is courageous, and not just courageous, but also very compassionate counselors and pastors and leaders and teachers and mentors in the church who are willing to say, to speak the truth. They're willing to say to young ladies like Mary's daughter that I was just talking about, look, if you have any doubts, I'm right here. I'm ready to listen. And if you want to change your mind, I will walk with you and stand beside you, and I will hold your hand, and cry with you and pray with you and do whatever it takes to make sure that you don't make a life-changing decision without having actually talked things through with somebody. That we're not going to abandon you to this operating room, even while you still have doubts about your decision as you're being wheeled down the hallway to have both of your breasts removed. And I think that it's going to require courage, but not courage in a way that comes across as bombastic and antagonistic towards the people that need our help. I mean, I think it's time to push back pretty hard against some of our civil leaders who should know better. But as it relates to these people, our fellow Canadians who are struggling with these existential questions about, who am I and how should I live and where do I belong, the church should have a tone of compassion and willingness to help, to guide towards the truth, towards the peace that comes in Jesus Christ. So there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done there, but now under threat of criminal prosecution.
Yeah. I had a thought that I don't think we articulated it, but it's almost a guaranteed that this wouldn't be allowed. In the scenario you described about the woman who had the child who had both breasts removed,
mm-hmm.
would now counseling her, let's say, back to her gender aligning with her, biology,
mm-hmm.
like detransitioning,
mm-hmm.
would that now be deemed illegal, even though she wants to detransition?
Yeah. So the answer is probably, but not 100% clear. So the reason I say probably is because it's one directional. The criminal code amendment through Bill C-4 is one directional. So if you want to help somebody transition in one direction, away from heterosexual or away from so-called cisgender, which is where it's a made up word, but it basically means that your gender identity matches your biological sex. So if you want to transition someone away from that, no problem. That's not conversion therapy. But if you want to do the very same thing, but towards that, like towards heterosexual or towards cisgender, that's what's illegal. So that's the question. What about detransitioners? Would detransitioning, even if they choose, is that criminal? So I'd say on the face of the definition, yes. But this is the inherent contradiction, because actually, if they have effectively transitioned such that she is no longer a female, but actually now a male, because, well, that's what we've said we've done through this operation and everything else, is we transitioned her from female to male. Well, she is now, quote unquote, male. She isn't actually scientifically or biologically, but anyway, that's what she identifies as. Well, what if she wants to transition again? If in fact gender is fluid and she wants to transition again, can we twist the law and its definition to suit our purposes insofar as it says, well, we're actually not helping her stay male, we're helping her transition again, and she's just transitioning on to something new, which is female. Perhaps, I don't know, like it's one of those things that is an inherent contradiction in the bill. It's pretty crazy.
I appreciate the sort of creativity in your answer, because it demonstrates the problem with the bill. It demonstrates the problem with the way the rules are written. Yeah, it's I'll and just for the audience, all the stuff that you referenced, like the articles that you were talking about with regards to the letter, I think you titled it "Chief Concern with Conversion Therapy Law," where you're sort of having that conversation.
Yeah, in Convivian magazine.
Yeah, I'll make sure to have that in the show notes page. I'll have the bill, for the listener, might be too late now to listen along and read now that I've said it, but for our audience, they would know I probably have most of this stuff in our show notes. For our audience, we're really grateful for your time.
Yes, sir.
I know you've got some other commitments, so before you go, is there any of your work or anything that you would like to promote that our listeners can reach out to you, or the constitutional talk that you
oh, right.
If they wanted to have you come to their church, how can they reach out to you? How can they utilize some of your services?
Yeah, for sure. So you can always contact me at my email address, andre@arpacanada.ca. So ARPA Canada.ca. Or check out our website, arpacanada.ca. For other resources and commentary on bills like Bill C-4. We engage on other social political issues as well. We have some resources that folks can use as well to contact their MPs in a pretty easy, straightforward manner. So we developed technology called Easy Mail technology, where with a few clicks you can email your own representative in a pretty direct way on a topic of concern. Yeah, and it's actually been a pretty effective tool that's been used well. Also in this C-4 debate, we used it to email over 4,000 email senators over 4,000 times in the days leading up to the Senate dealing with this bill. So that's pretty effective, and folks could check that out as well. And then particularly, on that talk around our constitutional heritage, by all means, just you can reach out to me by email, andre@arpacanada.ca, and see if we can't make something work.
Yeah, that easy mail technology, I am quite impressed with that. Is that something you guys developed in-house because it would, it met your particular need?
Yep. That's right. Yeah, we developed it in-house. I had it for a number of years now. It's gone through a few updates and so on, but yeah, it's pretty slick, if I can say so myself. So
yeah, no, I think I to be honest, for Bill C-4, I took advantage of it, used it. What I really appreciated was like there's a little bit of nuance of I can cultivate the message, but you guys have given me a paragraph or two or send, and I can just do I want that one or this one or what aligns sort of. You guys have done a really good job, I think, with giving people options, but also making it super easy to draft a pretty thorough email in a matter of minutes, as opposed to having to sit there and write everything out for the individual. So I would definitely have some respect for the technology, but also it's innovative. I don't really see a lot of other people doing something similar. So
good, thank you. I'm glad you could use it. And yeah, that's exactly right. Like, we want to do it in a way that your email is still from you, and it's personalized by you. So it's very easy to edit it, but we give you talking points to make it so much easier for you. So
That sounds helpful.
Yeah, thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks again, Andre, for being gracious with your time and coming on and giving us these great insights. I'm sure our listeners will definitely find it helpful.
good. Thanks again for having me.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.